Have you noticed there is increasing talk about a certain United Nations resolution numbered 2758? In the Taiwan press, it felt relentless. 2758 this, 2758 that. We asked a data analysis company to count exactly how many times the issue came up over the past 3 years. You know what? There's been a spike. In 2024, the number reached some 3,000 articles, more than the previous 2 years combined. There were some 800 in the month of September alone. What is this document all about in the first place? For that, travel with me half a century back in time to 1971 to the United Nations headquarters in New York. The 26th session of the UN General Assembly, the main policy-making body of the United Nations, was gripped by a heated debate. Who should represent China? Mind you, this was 22 years after the People's Republic was founded. Chiang Kai-shek, the former leader of China, had been defeated in the Civil War and escaped to Taiwan. Having lost his legitimacy, Chiang's people illegally held on to China's seat at the UN. This was not acceptable. Beijing insisted that that seat belongs to the 800 million Chinese people represented by the People's Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek actually shared the view that there could only be one seat, as there was only one China, although he falsely claimed to be its legit leader. How did things play out? The People's Republic had been fighting for 2 decades to reclaim China's lawful seat at the UN, but guess who was standing in the way? Chiang's staunch ally, the United States, had a strategic stake in isolating new China. It deployed all kinds of tactics to block Beijing's bid, keeping the matter off discussion, setting a high bar for any change, requiring a 2/3 majority instead of a simple one. And when that was not enough, they even attempted to create 2 seats. Desperate indeed. But time was on our side. The PRC survived and persisted. As more developing countries joined the UN, they rallied behind Beijing. October 25th, the day of the showdown. Members first voted down one final American attempt to obstruct the matter. Loud cheers erupted in the hall. Knowing his fate, Chiang's men left the room.
They couldn't represent anybody except what the Americans wanted them to say. I think they were an embarrassment to China, to the Chinese people.
Charles Liu is from Taiwan and witnessed that pivotal moment. As a 21-year-old Princeton student, he was closely following what was happening. So when the day finally arrived, he and a group of friends headed straight for the UN.
When the 2/3 vote requirement lost, the motion lost, and we knew this was going to happen, that China would be restored to the United Nations. It was very, very exciting. At that time, it was the non-aligned countries, led by Algeria, Tanzania, and a number of others who led the charge.
128 countries cast their solemn vote on a draft resolution tabled by developing countries to restore Beijing's lawful seat. The hall fell silent as the vote counting began. The results were 76 votes for, 35 against, and 17 abstentions. In a landslide, Resolution 2758 was passed. Many delegates cheered, even danced to celebrate the result, while the US delegation sulked.
I remember watching Ambassador, I think he's called Salim of Tanzania, dancing in the aisles. It took so many years of effort by friends of China to promote this, to get it done. And I think China will remember that.
Over 50 years later, he still gets emotional when remembering that moment.
What this country has gone through goes beyond description. What it has done for its people cannot be imagined in human history. And that day is the beginning of the world getting to know the China that we know.
20 days later, the delegation from Beijing, led by then Vice Foreign Minister Chiao Guanghua, took their seats behind the name tag China, a truly historic moment. When asked how he felt, Chiao let out a victorious laughter. Could there have been a better way to answer this question on behalf of the 800 million Chinese people? Resolution 2758 was actually very short. It contained only 153 words. The central decision, and I quote, was to restore all its rights to the People's Republic of China and to recognize the representatives of its government as the only legitimate representatives of China to the United Nations. The document decides to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy at the United Nations and in all the organizations related to it. The resolution set the foundation of the UN position concerning Taiwan. During the following year, in 1972, the World Health Assembly adopted another resolution recognizing the PRC as the only legitimate representatives of China to the World Health Organization. This position has been upheld ever since. In 2007, when asked to consider Taiwan's application to join the UN, delegations at the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly agreed that the bid was not acceptable for legal reasons linked to General Assembly Resolution 2758 that gave China's seat in the Assembly to the People's Republic of China. In 2024, Chief Spokesman for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated this time-honored position.
It means in terms of our standing on Taiwan as a province of China.
There it is. You heard it from the horse's mouth. The United Nations considers Taiwan as a province of China. That's why Taiwan has no membership in the UN or any of its agencies. There's no Taiwan flag flying outside any UN buildings.
All these international organizations within the UN system, they follow the resolution 2758. And also most of the UN members, when they establish the diplomatic relation with China, they follow the One China principle.
这个决议现在已经发展成了习惯国际法。那么现在这个决议是得到世界上绝大多数国家的承认和支持的。
Fast forward half a century, what triggered this latest wave of media attention? We asked the same data analysis company to look for answers, and here's what they found.
In 2022, 649 stories were published citing Resolution 2758 by 32 Taiwan media outlets. Among them, 95, more than 1 in 7, referenced think tanks. A deeper analysis into 226 U.S. influential think tanks revealed that an increasing number of reports, newsletters, or transcripts have been produced on this topic during the past 3 years. In 2022, 11 documents were published. Over the next 3 years, this number nearly tripled, reaching 29 documents in 2024 alone. By the end of 2024, a total of 52 documents have been published on Resolution 2758 by 19 U.S. think tanks.
And there are some big names behind these documents. The North Atlantic Council, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Council on Foreign Relations. But one institution in particular stood out: the German Marshall Fund. Since 2022, the German Marshall Fund has published 7 separate documents on the matter, including 2 major reports. one in 2022 and the other in 2024. What's their argument? Well, the central idea is that the Chinese government has misinterpreted Resolution 2758. The 2024 report states, "The People's Republic of China's claim that Taiwan is part of China is based on flawed legal assumptions and arguments, and none of this language or the rest of the text addresses, much less decides, the international legal question of Taiwan's status." Before dissecting these claims, who exactly is the German Marshall Fund? The German Marshall Fund is an American policy think tank founded in 1972 as a memorial to the US Marshall Plan. It styles itself as independent, but a quick look at its donors list reveals some pretty powerful interests at play. Three of the largest donors, namely the Howard Buffett Foundation, George Soros's Open Society Foundations, and the Rockefeller Foundation, have ties with the controversial USAID. Yes, that shady US cash cow alleged to have used American taxpayer dollars to fund propaganda campaigns and regime change operations abroad.
These are not independent bodies. These are bodies related to defense, they are related to military pacts and so on. It's not a conspiracy, but they are very closely tied to places of power within the United States.
Scroll down, the list of donors and interests from Taiwan also feature prominently, chiefly the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, the Global Taiwan Institute, and the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States, known as TECRO, whose central mission is to lobby Washington. In 2023, TECRO alone donated up to almost $1 million.
台湾对美国的游说活动做得很仔细，所以美国对他的这种游说其实是放任的所以他有这个渠道去公关美国的很多智库还有一些学者。
Barney Glaser, the managing director of the fund's Indo-Pacific program, seems to have a particular bee in her bonnet on this topic. Out of the think tank's 7 documents on Resolution 2758, she is behind 6 of them. Wow, is she on commission or something? As a former US State Department Defense Department consultant, she is not shy of her close relationship with some people in Taiwan. What's her stake here?
他其实跟台湾当局的关系非常密切，可以说是跟台湾当局的利益集团是相捆绑的。
Here, it is in black and white. Both reports on Resolution 2758 were made possible by the generous support of Taiwan authorities. Very independent indeed. But nonetheless, let's give Ms. Glaser the benefit of the doubt and examine her claims. Specifically, that Resolution 2758 doesn't mention Taiwan by name and therefore cannot be used as a legal base for Beijing's claim that there is only one China and Taiwan is part of it. Is she right? Well, it's true. The resolution did not mention Taiwan by name nor to whom it belongs. But the thing she didn't tell you is, it didn't need to.
这个决议本身没有涉及到台湾地位的问题当年没有讲到台湾地位，因为台湾本来就是在一个中国里面嘛。
A simple fact that's often ignored. Let's refresh our memory. In 1895, after losing the First Sino-Japanese War, China was forced to cede Taiwan to Japan under an unequal treaty. Of course, had Taiwan not been part of China in the first place, the Chinese authorities could not have been ordered to give it away, right? Then, in 1943, the US, UK and China signed a legally binding treaty in Cairo, Egypt, demanding that Japan return all stolen Chinese territories, including Taiwan. 2 years later, toward the end of World War II, the 3 countries signed another treaty in Potsdam, Germany, reiterating this demand. Months later, Japan surrendered and Taiwan was restored to China. This is why Chiang Kai-shek was able to escape to the island. Otherwise, he would have needed a visa. At this time in history, the US, as a main broker of these treaties, saw no issue in Taiwan being a part of China. US President Harry Truman later made this clear to the world.
For the past 4 years, the United States and other allied powers have accepted the exercise of Chinese authority over the island.
The Potsdam Declaration, Cairo Declaration have already solved the problem of Taiwan is a part of China. And then the resolution 2758 solved the question of who is the legal representative of this China.
Legal status of Taiwan was settled ages ago. At the end of the World War II, by the time the United Nations was formed, it was very clear the status of Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan was taken from the Japanese and given back to China. So there's no question of whether or not there's another different country here.
As a veteran scholar on China, Ms. Glaser must know Taiwan's history. Yet, out of the 6 documents she published, there is absolutely zero mention of Cairo or Potsdam. Zero, zilch, nada.
他非常了解，但是他就是变成一个工具来操作这个事情，就是把27号决议作为服务美国对台政策的一个工具，选择性失明选择性去操作这个事情。
That's certainly not the case. I think you have to bend over backwards in order to be able to make that conclusion. And I think anyone who's a lawyer or an international lawyer or a legal scholar can sort of see through that.
2 things. Number one, it's being paid by somebody. The more important part is there's a sense of desperation. China's global position has become so strong that it's becoming clear that whatever attempts they may make is not going to change the course of history. And reunification will happen, whether or not in forms that you like or not.
So exactly what is US official policy on Taiwan? Well, it depends on when you ask. 5 months after Truman's announcement, the Korean War broke out. To prevent Beijing from uniting China and also to enable the US to intervene in the island should it one day see fit, it unilaterally declared Taiwan to be of indeterminate status.
The determination of the future status of Formosa must await the restoration of security in the Pacific, a peace settlement with Japan, or consideration by the United Nations.
They decided that any expansion of China back into territories conquered by Japan, such as Taiwan and the South China Sea Islands, should not be permitted for strategic reasons.
When it was in US strategic interest to counter the Soviet Union in the 1970s, the US established diplomatic relations with New China. In doing so, its position on Taiwan flipped again.
The United States recognizes the government of the People's Republic of China as a sole legal government of China. The government of the United States of America acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China, and Taiwan is part of China.
The then US position on Taiwan was by and large clear. But as China grew stronger, the US started to roll back from its original position. Taiwan's status seemingly became blurry again in the eyes of the US.
For the United States, Taiwan is very important in these 3 sectors. Geostrategic competition. The United States, they think about the first island chain. And in the emerging technologies, of course, chips, right? The Americans look at Taiwan's chips capability and the overall industry and try to move it back to the United States. And then third, ideological competition, the so-called democracy versus autocracy. The so-called status of Taiwan is not decided. This old theory has come out again. They think a kind of a unified China would be the so-called hegemon power in this region.
To manufacture public consent for policy shifts, you need experts. And the Barney Glazers of this world come very much in handy. Academic ethics or conscience? Out of the question.
The reports aim really to firstly create doubt, to argue that there is actually an alternative possibility. Step one. Step two then is to publicise that, and they do that through conferences and events, and of course the distribution of the reports themselves. Then the next move has been to have politicians visit.
2758 did not endorse, is not equivalent to, and does not reflect a consensus for China's One China principle.
This is Mark Lambert, the then US State Department China coordinator, being hosted at the German Marshall Fund's Guest of Honor during a special event ahead of the release of its report on Resolution 2758. The very next day, this came out.
We do believe that China is misusing UNGA Resolution 2758. They try to somehow say that the UN adopted China's so-called One China principle.
It's like a money laundering operation, only they're not washing money, they're washing policy. And here's how it looks on the ground. In October 2021, then US Senior State Department official Rick Waters claimed that the PRC has misused Resolution 2758. At the end of the following year, the Taiwan Status Diplomacy Act was introduced in the House, urging the US to call on the United Nations to accurately interpret Resolution 2758. Then, in July 2023, the US House passed the Taiwan International Solidarity Act, asserting that Resolution 2758 did not take a position on the relationship between the PRC and Taiwan. In May 2024, Resolution 687 was introduced in the Senate. It states that the US does not affirmatively recognize the PRC's claim to control over Taiwan. Finally, in September, then Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell argued that China is using Resolution 2758 as a tool to assert claims over Taiwan.
I don't know what they're thinking. They're not thinking very much. This has raised the temperature very, very much, and it's extremely dangerous because it just takes a misstep by Taiwanese politicians or by American politicians to set off something that nobody could conceivably want.
But it's also about laying the groundwork to rationalize a collective Western intervention in Taiwan itself. And because we no longer accept that there's only one China, therefore it's not a domestic question, we are not intervening in a domestic issue.
These moves all took place under the Biden administration. Now with Donald Trump carrying the baton, things appear to have taken an even uglier turn. On February the 13th, less than a month into Donald Trump's second term in office, the State Department's website updated the page on its policy concerning Taiwan, a long-held line stating that the US does not support Taiwan independence was removed. Is the US now signaling it supports Taiwan independence?
The Trump administration sees Taiwan as something that they can get a handle on to negotiate with Beijing for a grand bargain for what they want. They see it as a chip. You want us to put it back, you have to give me something.
To add to the confusion, the US president and top diplomat are saying different things.
We have a long-standing position on Taiwan that we're not going to abandon, and that is we are against any forced, compelled, coercive change in the status of Taiwan. We have to have military capabilities that allow us to respond to the threat that China is posing, and we need to be concerned.
While Trump, in multiple interviews before and after taking office, has held his cards close to his chest.
Are you committed to defending Taiwan?
I never say.
Still won't say.
I never say. I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
He has not dared to easily challenge China's One China principle or encourage Taiwanese independence activities. However, there are many anti-China politicians in his administration and the Congress who often stir up trouble to undermine the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
So who's really calling the shots? We don't know for sure. But mind you, Beijing is scrutinizing the situation extremely closely, as this is China's #1 red line. Rubio's narrative of not, quote-unquote, abandoning an apparent ally, in this case the island of Taiwan, is a familiar one, isn't it? Remember, there was much talk about the US not abandoning Ukraine. When the war first broke out, a Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow narrative was pushed a lot. And it was this narrative that enabled the US to step up weapon sales to the island. Well, look how the whole thing has turned under Trump. From Ukraine to tariff wars, once the shining city on the hill, now where is your credibility? Those who attempt to rewrite Taiwan's history, where is your decency?
If the people in Taiwan don't see what happens when you become a proxy for the Americans, then they're really stupid. It's so clear what happened to the Ukraine. Thrown under the bus.
Let's not mislead ourselves. The people in the United States are not worried about the welfare of the Chinese people in Taiwan. The Ukrainians, unfortunately, became a pawn for European and US ambitions. If I was just an ordinary person in Taiwan, I would not want that. I would not want my land to be somebody else's battlefield.
Well, given how things have worked out, we can only hope that Taiwan does indeed learn from the lesson of Ukraine. Never allow yourself to be used as a pawn. And I hope that the German Marshall Fund also learns a thing or two.